Welcome back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and we're joined again today by the prestigious Assemblyman Joe Patterson from District 5 in Placer County and El Dorado County.
Super co-host now.
Yeah,
right?
you're exactly.
Yeah.
You know, this is like what,
Third
time?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we are currently in the midst of what we call end of session. The last week. This is the final week of legislative session for 2023. How things treating you so far?
I like
your first
it.
one,
I mean,
so.
not having committee meetings.
Yeah.
Where at like 3 committee meetings at the same time, different locations, and just hanging out on the floor reading the bills basically. I don't mind doing that.
I think it's funny that doesn't bother you because, like, I mean, the committee meeting thing I get, but I feel so trapped, like, because we're literally not allowed to leave the floor.
Yeah, I don't think people know that the sergeants, that protect us also keep us from leaving during
yes,
session.
They do.
So
we have to get express permission from the NFL or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's an escape route. There was a secret escape route.
There
right?
was. That's right.
And now they have a sergeant
there
because a member who I shall not name just left one time. So
I actually was messing with the guy at that post the other day, the sergeant at that post, because I asked him, I'm like, who are you protecting us from over here?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, oh, you just don't want us to sneak out. That's the real issue.
Yep.
So yeah, that's pretty funny. It's I mean, I think it's interesting that we save some of the hardest bills, and we're going to get into some of these in this podcast, but we save some of the toughest issues for the final 2 weeks. And I felt that this year so far has gone pretty well. I mean, there have been things that I've not been super happy about that have passed, but overall it's been a mix. And I felt like this last week was pretty rough.
Yeah,
it was pretty rough, and so it's interesting.
Well, it's frustrating because a lot of them, I mean, that we'll talk about, but the constitutional amendments and things that need 54 votes.
Yeah.
I mean, they've all been easily getting the 54 votes, and that's kind of a bummer because you still have to put your points out there, but some of these are just really, really bad for people and businesses and things like that. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I don't want to go any farther without mentioning that we are recording this on September 11th, 2023, 22 year anniversary of the attacks on 9/11. So I just wanted to give that a mention. I was at a really, really nice a ceremony this morning in Folsom, honoring those we've lost and the first responders, and with our police and fire department out there. So it was really nice. But definitely, it's kind of amazing. It's been 22 years. You've got my kids, other than what I've told them, have no no idea. They weren't around yet. So
I mean,
crazy.
Not only kids, but I mean, grown adults, young adults, right? Kids in college. Right. Basically, if you're in college or younger now, you don't remember. I mean, maybe even hitting up your 30s, because if you're 27, 28, you're only 5 or 6, right?
Yeah. So your memory is pretty.
So you lived it in some of the aftermath and all that. But I mean, it's one of those moments I'll never forget. I know exactly where I was.
Well, let's kick things off. We're actually going to do things a little differently this week. So we're going to start with our clip of the week. We usually end with it, but we're going to talk some taxes, okay? Because last week we passed 2 constitutional amendments that I think are going to have a pretty huge impact on taxpayers in a negative way. And so ACA 1 and ACA 13 are, and we'll talk about kind of more what they do in a moment, but I wanted to play you this clip of our colleague James Gallagher, and then we'll discuss.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Though I appreciate my colleague trying to demsplain to us farm boys, we all know what this is. We all know what's really going on here, right? You all are trying to make it easier to raise taxes. It's that simple. You want to make it easier to raise taxes, and you're trying to game the system to get what you want and to stop the voters from being able to protect themselves against you all, right? Against more taxes coming their way. We all know what's going on. We don't need explanations, and you can't run away with it. It's no coincidence this is ACA 13. It's a direct attack on Prop 13, and it's trying to undermine those protections that voters want and need. Look, the problem is not revenue. It's not that you guys don't have enough money. It's not that locals don't have enough money. You've overseen some of the biggest budgets in California history. Our locals have seen some of the biggest budgets in California history. It's how you spend it. And I love you guys talking about homelessness. Oh, we need to do this for homelessness. You've spent $20 billion only to make the problem worse. The problem is not money. The problem is people don't trust you. They don't trust how you spend the money. And that's why they need these protections.
So I love it when James gets all passionate on the assembly floor. But this has kind of been the level of passion, I feel like, over the last week.
Yeah.
On the floor on some of these bigger issues. So, ACA 1 obviously attempts to lower the vote threshold for certain local tax, increases, which is interesting. So it would lower it from 2/3 requirement to 55%. But then ACA 13 would actually increase the vote threshold for anything that attempts to put taxpayer protections in place that require 2/3 vote.
Yep.
So, I mean, they're simultaneously wanting to make tax increases easier to pass while making taxpayer protections harder to pass. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty frustrating, I think, as a taxpayer, and I know who represents a community of taxpayers that strongly support Proposition 13 and some of these other protections. It's hard to see.
Yeah, it is. All of these, James is right. I mean, all these maneuvers are to just make it easier to raise taxes and harder to lower them. That's the bottom line. And I've never really met anybody that says, we really need to be paying more taxes. I think the tax structure is very complicated. There's a ton of money. I don't understand, as long as I've been around this place, when I started as an intern back in the day to now, every single year, there are dozens of proposed tax increases. Why can't we go a year where we're not jacking up taxes more and more and more and more?
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, I mean, you don't meet a lot of people that say, hey, I want to pay more taxes. I mean, there are people that maybe want to, but the reality is that we already pay some of the most in the country in California, right? And so I think even more so in California, taxpayers are more sensitive because with the exception of maybe property taxes, they already pay some of the highest taxes in the country.
Yeah. I just went and filled up my gas tank this morning. Gas is at Costco is $4.99. That means everywhere else it's $5.50 or something, right? $5.40, $5.30, something like that. And $1.25, $1.30 depends on sort of the tax rate at that point, but it is to taxes in California. And I don't think people realize that $1.25 of every gallon is going to pay for taxes.
Right.
And it's so outrageous. Yet just this year, I made hostile amendments to try to stop the gas tax from going up. But just this year, the Democrats pushed through this, we're going to hold oil companies accountable. I mean, what has it done? It's done nothing. They've done nothing. It was a total virtue signal thing by the governor, basically. And
well, that was the crazy thing, too, about the gas tax increase that passed a few years ago, is that it goes up every single July.
Every single year.
And so and I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but we pay the highest gas taxes in the entire nation.
Yeah.
And we drive on the 46th ranked roads. So we pay the most, we get the least in return. I think that frustrates people even more than the taxes, is the fact of how little we get for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what James was channeling here. It's like, people don't trust that this money's going to actually go to what you say it's going to go to.
Yeah. And it really is a double whammy, because what they do is they say, hey, look, local governments, you don't qualify for some of the highway projects unless you have your own matching sales tax measure.
Yep.
So in Placer County, where the voters by 64% were supportive of it, but it needs 2/3, right?
66 or so.
But they voted to not have this gas tax increase. And so therefore Highway 65 in Placer County can't get state funds because they don't have their own tax. But I mean, these people are paying $1.25 for every single gallon they fill up.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me, and I don't know what is going to get people to see this, but there are a number of, one of the pushes for ACA 1 is the fact that there have been a number of tax measures at the local level that have failed by a couple of percentage points, to your point, right? They needed 66 something percent and they got, 65 or 64. We've had the same thing kind of going on in Folsom where, there's been a couple attempts, and Folsom has one of the lowest sales tax rates in the region, right? So it's not necessarily unreasonable for them to bring that to the voters. But because of all the pressure from the state and the taxes that are just poured on at the state level, there's no appetite for local tax increases.
Yeah.
And I think, it's like, I'm trying to get people to realize at the state level, if we just keep hammering taxpayers here, our locals are not going to have a chance.
Yeah.
And if you really want us to actually have conversations about this at the local level, you need to lay off our taxpayers.
The most efficient use would be local tax rather than
of course
state tax.
But
they do both. They want both here.
Yeah.
And it's at what point do you stop asking for more of people's money?
Exactly. To quickly explain Gallagher's joke there, he said, you don't need to dem-splain to us farm boys.
Yeah.
So this was in response to a few speakers earlier. Assemblymember Berman out of the Bay Area had made this argument that for my rural colleagues to help them understand, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Yeah. And he didn't mean it in a mean way, but I think that's what James was responding to. And the Democrats I sit next to were cracking up. It was such a hilarious moment.
I think it's what's interesting being on the floor is you get to hear all the almost heckling, because there is kind of heckling and jeering and stuff on the floor, and that's actually what kind of makes it fun. But you don't get it on the camera.
You don't see or hear any of that on the actual feed.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting there, it's really funny to, I turned around and they're just cracking up. They thought it was hilarious. But James is good at that, getting along with people on both sides of the aisle, but also passionately defending, I think, the right policy in a lot of cases. So anyway, so just to close the loop on this, ACA 1 and ACA 13 now move to the Senate, where they're going to be potentially debated, I heard, even this week in committee.
Well, that's what
I've heard. Well,
right?
I think they could wait till next year and still get on the ballot. But long story short, both of these bills have to go to the Senate. They could get stopped there. I don't know how likely or unlikely that is, but if they do get out of the Senate, they go straight to the ballot, and then voters would have an opportunity to vote on this.
You know what I was kind of surprised about is ACA 1 almost, that was a lot closer of a vote than I thought it was going to be. And then ACA 13 just sailed through no problem. And I thought that
is really
very strange, because ACA 13 really is there's a provision of Prop 13. Prop 13 would not have passed. This is really important for people to know. Prop 13 would not have passed if ACA 13 was the law of the land. Yeah. It's crazy.
It is crazy. And well, the good news is the voters will ultimately get the final say on this. But how friendly of a ballot title and summary is the Attorney General going to give it?
So bad. We need to take the power away from the Attorney General. This was, I guess, both of our predecessors, Kevin Kiley, really talked about this a lot. But the worst possible person is a totally biased partisan
right?
writing these ballot and title summaries. That's how you got Prop 47 and 57, because basically the Attorney General lied to people.
So so this is kind of funny. So these two constitutional amendments, ACA 1 and 13, are moving forward. Our colleague in the Senate, Roger Nilo, who's actually my senator, has a constitutional amendment he introduced, SCA 3, that would pick up kind of on amending that or fixing that problem, right? Basically taking the person that writes the ballot title and summary, the Attorney General, taking it out of their hands, who is a partisan official, and putting it in the hands of the nonpartisan legislative analyst who already writes the analysis for all of our propositions. That actually got out of committee, but it was held in appropriations.
Wow, that's shocking. That's
right. Isn't that shocking?
No, not at all. That's just...
But I mean, clearly, right? These two pass, but that one won't. And if we really needed any level of reform, it would be SCA 3 to just strip the partisanship out of initiatives. I mean, it's absolutely crazy to me that a partisan official has that much power and can name something like Proposition 47, right, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, when it decriminalized, or reduced penalties for shoplifting and other crimes. So, I think were these to get to the ballot, I am worried about the title and summary.
100%. I actually talked about this. Isaac Bryan had a bill on reforming the referendum process. And I said, this is missing a major component, and that would be changing who writes the ballot. You can't have fair ballot process without changing that component. Otherwise, it's complete. It's I don't know. It's almost fraudulent.
Yeah. And that actually isn't in our notes today, but that's a good one to mention. That one just got signed by the governor. I'm blanking on the number off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But basically changes the referendum process. We've talked about it on a previous episode, but pretty much moving forward. It did get watered down a bit in the Senate, which I was thankful for. But it's still not great public policy, in my opinion. All right, let's recap the week. Last week, which was the kind of the first half of end of session. We're now entering the second and final week of end of session this week, but a few stories to talk about and a few bills to talk about. The first one I wanted to get your take on was a story that it was getting me worked up. Governor of California went on, I think, Meet the Press on NBC. And they asked him to reflect on COVID, the pandemic, and COVID policies. And he said, we would have done everything differently. But he kind of prefaced that by saying, but it's just, we didn't know. We didn't know. Hindsight's 2020. And he also said, at one point, it wasn't me, it was just we collectively.
Exactly.
That just we were blind to the right decisions because we just had no clue. Did you read that one? I don't know.
Oh, I 100% read it. And I obviously hindsight is always 2020 on these things. But when you look at how a lot of the guidance and stuff from state departments, it's considered outdoor dining if the walls are 36 inches or lower, but if it goes above 36 inches, then it's considered indoor dining. And I don't know of any scientists that was talking about stuff like that. I mean, when you surround yourself with people that agree with you on everything, you're not going to get any debate or discussion in these sorts of things. Yeah. So I will say the governor's office did have a few good people working within it, having worked with some of the industries prior to being elected, that were actually helpful and would listen. But at some point, the governor made sort of contrary decisions. And
well, and don't forget the French Laundry.
Yeah, you don't get to apologize. You don't get to apologize. I mean, well, no. Sorry, take that back. You should apologize, and then maybe we can forgive you. But
don't
we're not
get
to
complete
forget.
Ignorance, though.
Yeah. Oh, this is what we came up with. Really?
Right.
So you keep movie production going, and you shut down the mom and pop restaurants or the daycares or the schools or whatever it may be.
I mean, we had the longest school shutdown in the nation. Kept schools closed longer than any other state by quite a bit, actually. As a result, we have the highest learning loss of any state in the nation. Our kids suffered the most. And before that, we were already one of the worst states when it came to the achievement gap. We were already one of the worst in the country. So we exacerbated that. And, I was on a school board during the pandemic, and we literally were not allowed to be open, despite, the fact that we wanted to locally. I mean, it's pretty angering to hear that now.
Yeah.
And I think on the same interview, he criticized someone on the right for being authoritarian, right? Like in the same interview. Okay. Which the irony was so blatant, right? Because he literally used emergency powers for 2-3 years. He took control of the entire state. Even the former Speaker of the Assembly said, we really let him get away with too much. And this is someone in his own party that said the legislature should have done more during the pandemic to, to protect the separation of powers and protect Californians. And that didn't happen. The governor literally ruled the state for 2 or 3 years without any checks or balances.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, it was a crazy interview to listen to.
It was, but that was you're right. The speaker said that, and I agree with him in that assessment. But also at the same time, they would have had to basically fight with the governor because the governor was signing executive orders left and right that did all these things.
Yep.
And Department of Public Health doing the same thing. And the legislature would have had to come in and basically take that authority away from him. That would not have happened.
Yeah.
But totally agree with him. Just would not have happened.
Yeah. So I found this tweet, and I won't, go too much more into this, but just listing all the crazy stuff during the pandemic, right? Obviously closing schools, banning visiting dying relatives in hospitals, banning people from witnessing the birth of their child, from funerals, from weddings, shutting down businesses, exacerbating our unemployment insurance system, pitting neighbors against one another in a lot of ways, right? Using this one you'll appreciate, using the pandemic as an excuse to empty prisons of violent felons, letting just tons of people onto the streets.
25,000 inmates during that time. California did,
because of COVID.
There was serious COVID going around in prisons.
Oh, for sure. No, there's no doubt about that. But
they released 25,000 people, and it's crazy. But what was you said one above though that just in terms of things being closed and it just didn't make any sense. A lot of these things, I think. The seeing dying relatives. My gosh, I was in Oregon during COVID lockdowns, and we would stay on a beach somewhere. And New York obviously had similar strict restrictions, but they're also more dense in the cities and things like that. But I was on a run, and I was listening to this podcast about these families that could not see their dying loved ones, and they would go up to basically a window and wave at them while they were dying.
Yep.
Like, what the hell is going on? And the fact that we allowed that to happen, it's mind-boggling. And by the way, he says we were given this.
Yep.
He never accepted ownership. He says we would do things differently.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, it wasn't I. There was actually that point where he said, not I, but we.
But we. Yeah.
Right? He does not accept ownership of any of that.
Which, I mean, he was on TV daily with these updates. So the fact, it was the governor was running the show.
Yeah.
I mean, this was his show. Censoring physicians, scientists, I mean, the list goes on and on. There was a point during the pandemic when our local school board meeting lifted the mask, the state lifted the mask mandate for public meetings, but kept it for kids.
Oh, I remember
so
that.
There was literally a 2 or 3 week period where nobody in our public school board meetings had to wear a mask, but our kids had to keep wearing masks.
No.
And we were I was I was losing my mind at that point. I mean, this, by the way, was not early on. This was like 2 years into the pandemic or something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was way into the pandemic, and we're sitting in there and it's like, we don't need to wear a mask, but my 8-year-old does.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. But yeah, I think it's just frustrating not even a sorry, but like, hindsight's 2020. So that's a bummer. That's basically the response we get.
Yeah. Well, he's on his national tour to become president. So
right. Which he's not running though.
Yeah, totally.
That's what he said. All right. So moving on, pass fail. Little update. 3 major bills in the first half of the session last week. So first we'll start with the fail. I wanted to talk about this because it's your bill, AB 19. So you have a bipartisan bill over, I think, 40 co-authors, something like that, to require Narcan in schools, which is the agent that counteracts fentanyl overdoses, died in the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Yeah.
So tell me about that one.
I heard the governor's office got involved.
Really?
I have no insight into that.
Okay.
But this was a bipartisan measure. I had 2 Democratic joint authors. A lot of my Democratic colleagues have come up and expressed extreme frustration. But the reasoning I was given is because, hey, the governor's budget already funded it. There was one person who was upset that I was tweeting about this, but he said, hey, look, it's already funded in the budget. Well, yeah, but it's not required. I think that's the point, is it needs to be required on campus. We require other things to be on campus. Yep. By the way, it's a nasal spray. There's no risk to it, but even the California Teachers Association supported this bill. So the teachers
that says
wanted
a lot.
That says a lot.
They oppose a lot of things that make, put new stuff on campuses.
Yeah. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that's
great. But it died in Appropriations Committee. And I think that's, unfortunately, I think the reality is kids are going to be exposed to this at some point on campus. They already have been. But now, when we could have had a chance to end the risk to that, and so we gotta sort that out. But
it's so maddening to me. I mean, there are school districts across the state that are implementing their own policies right now, locally, which I think is great.
Yeah.
But this is a no-brainer state level issue.
Yeah.
That I think school districts would welcome. I don't even think you would get pushback.
There was none
from anybody.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you're funding it. But requiring it is such a simple, small thing that we can do to make sure that kids are at least safe at school when it comes to fentanyl overdoses, that there's at least something there to help revive them if there is, God forbid, an overdose or something.
Yeah, we have EpiPens on campus, and I think
we have AEDs, right?
Yeah, look, I don't want to dismiss the importance of those, but I think we can say the risk right now is greater with fentanyl than it is, peanut allergies, which are very dangerous, by the way. Again, not minimizing it at all. Well,
I just think, I mean, this is especially right now just something that we need to have available.
Yeah.
So that was really upsetting to see. Another bill. Let's see, the second bill here, AB 957. So this is a bill, this one passed 61-16, a bill to require the courts to consider a parent's affirmation of their child's gender identity or expression as a factor in determining custody. So, we're talking about in custody disputes between parents. You gave a pretty impassioned speech on the custody side of this. Tell me about your feelings on that.
Well, right now, nothing stops the courts from considering that already. But the reality is, having come from a divorced family, they're already super messy, and the courts can already consider it. But this is the only thing that I can see of that gets a special notice of what the courts need to consider. And I think that's a problem because there are all sorts of factors in divorces. And also, I've seen it already used, California's friendliness to these sorts of things. And it's used between, again, parents use the divorces and they use the children. It's a sad reality as leverage in custody and divorce proceedings. And so So I think it's a complete mistake to add a little bit more onto the judge's plate on what to consider. They already consider what's in the best health, wellness, and safety of it. Already says that in the law.
And this adds this as a factor, but I think in a lot of ways it really puts the thumb on the scale.
100%.
And I was talking to my staff about this because it's like, it was like the definitions, right, between affirmation and support. And I mean, this is not a simple issue. This is a very complex issue as a parent, as a child, right? These are things that, families that are dealing with these issues are, struggling with already. But there are many, many different parents that would support their child through that. Despite, taking the affirm word out of it, but just you want two parents that are going to support the child no matter what.
Yeah.
Whatever they're going through, right? And so the idea that we're now adding kind of this thumb on the scale is really concerning.
Yeah. I think the assumption that generally speaking, parents, I think the vast majority of parents are going to be there for their children, period. I'm not saying
I would
every
say vast
parent
majority,
is the best parent in the world at all. I think every family actually has a pretty messed up, something messed up in it,
of
right?
Course.
But I think the vast majority of people are going to do what's best for their children, whatever that may be. But that also means there could be disagreement on what the best is between two people.
Path forward is,
I mean, I can't even figure out what I want for dinner with my wife.
Yeah.
Much less something complex like this.
Yeah, well, and it's important to point out that for the families or the parents that maybe aren't doing that, are not supporting their children and are abusive or other issues, like there are laws in place to address that, and there are systems in place to address that. Not that they're perfect systems, but they certainly are there. So
I had somebody in an assembly member who supported the bill say to me, well, sometimes sometimes you don't know the parents aren't going to be supportive until after a child comes out of the closet or indicates that they're wants a transition. And I'm listening to that. I'm hearing that. Okay, well, let's solve that problem. Let's address that issue. What are some solutions to that? Not changing the entire custody battle over that. I think there are other ways that this can be addressed, and I would be open to listening to those, but this was not it. This was not it.
Yeah. Last bill here in that passed as well last week, 61-17. I believe both of these will now head to the governor's desk. And he's indicated he'll probably sign this next one, which is a bill to centralize control of local curriculum decisions. It's AB 1078 at the state level, and give the state superintendent power to level fiscal penalties for noncompliance. I actually spoke out on this one and was pretty frustrated by this as a former school board member, because I can't tell you how many times that we wanted to do something at the local level and we couldn't, because even small things, right? Because the state is so overly engaged in the local school board, process. They pass so many mandates on local school boards. Why do we even vote for local school board members to represent us when the state just tells them what to do? I mean, honestly, that is a frustration that I have had for a long time, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah. There were two things that drove me nuts about this. All the examples done by my good friends on the other side of the aisle, they're not even California examples. Talking about banning Charlotte's Web. That was in Kansas in like 1963 or something, right? And they start okay, maybe there's a school board that banned some popular books somewhere. There's 1,000 school boards. It's just not happening in California. But I think the biggest concern with this bill was that what it penalizes is it allows one dictator in California, the superintendent of public instruction or whoever that may be someday, to make a decision and withhold funding from schools, i.e. from teachers and kids, because that dictator doesn't agree with whatever decision the school board made.
Yeah. I mean, it is, it's just giving more power to the state.
To one individual
for decisions that, in my opinion, we have one of the most diverse states in California.
Yeah.
And, like it or not, right? There's different opinions and beliefs in all different parts of the state. And we elect local school boards for a reason. And if there are policies passed that communities don't agree with, they will vote to change their school boards.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the democratic process. Yeah. It is not the job of 120 legislators in Sacramento to say, no, we're going to pass this one-size-fits-all policy, and we now control this. We now tell you what to do. But that's what even so many people here came from local government, and they don't get that.
Exactly.
It doesn't make sense.
And with this stuff too, is the state already lays out a bunch of things you need to have in order to adopt a new curriculum for your district.
Right.
So it's totally false to say that school districts are banning curriculum or something like that. No, they have to adopt something approved by the state already, or write their own that meet certain metrics. And the bottom line is they all adopt something that's already done. The vast majority of them do anyways, and that's already approved by the state. So what's the problem? What are they addressing? They're not addressing anything that's happening in California.
Yeah, it is frustrating how the media has couched this as like the book ban bill.
Yeah.
Because or the, combating book bans.
Yeah.
Because, again, to your point, all of the book bans that they cited, none of them were applicable to California. And I think one of them happened in California. We looked it up. It was like someone banned, what was the book? Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
So we were all like, what are you talking about? Grapes of Wrath. So we looked it up, and it was like a school district in Kern County prohibited that book for a year and a half in 1939. And that was like the only example you could find of that action.
Yeah.
And we're just like, I mean, it's perplexing to me. It's like, this isn't even relevant to today.
Exactly.
And not only that, because, in the media, it's couched as like, I think it was tweeted by a few different reporters, like to prohibit book bans pushed by the right or whatever. When the other side of the aisle is quite literally canceling authors, changing books like classics, changing the actual words of the books to make them more appropriate for the modern day, supporting that. And yet, this bill is directed at some imaginary book ban that's that's
there
not even happening.
Actual entire authors, Dr. Seuss, for example, that have been banned from some districts. And that's recently, right? So I think, again, maybe they have good arguments for it. I'm just saying it's not really happening in California. So this was a total made up thing. But remember, the bill was actually worse when it was introduced.
Oh, it was actually much worse.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're kind of continuing on the bill to address something that doesn't exist right now and threaten local funding. But it was actually, it was quite a bit worse.
It would actually have given the state, the previous version, it would have given the state direct, ability to intervene at the local level.
Even removing a library book.
It's
crazy. Tim.
So, I mean, and again, I think it's important to point out that we both are big fans of the First Amendment. We're big fans of literature being accessible and to everyone, whether you agree or disagree with it. You should have access to literature. But it's also important that we have age-appropriate materials in our schools. And it's so funny because if a parent complains that their third grader has access to a book with, a problematic imagery or whatever it might be, they get, yelled at for banning books when they're just trying to argue for age-appropriate materials, And so
schools have curated books since the beginning of time to age appropriate levels. I mean, this is not new stuff. So it's all just made up. It's all made up.
It's certainly been I will say, I mean, there have been obviously debates at the local level on different issues, right? But it's certainly been, I think, over-exaggerated.
There are definitely books. I've seen one in a library in my district that I do not want my kid to read. And by the way, this book would not have been, probably would not have been allowed in a library 20 years ago. But it is now, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you curate it to where it's in a responsible area or a responsible checkout, just like we've always done in California? That's always happened. So the fact that this, banning books, yada, yada, I mean, the state has always, school districts have always curated books. It's never not happened.
So let's move ahead to kind of this coming week. We're adjourning for the year on September 14th, this coming Thursday.
Yeah.
The day after this podcast comes out, actually. So there's a number of bills to watch in the final week of legislative session. We discussed a bunch of last week that I'm not going to go over again, but for the listeners, want them to know that there's still a bunch outstanding. The SB 14 to make human trafficking of a minor a serious felony in California is still out there, waiting on a vote. SB 81, which expands eligibility for early release from prison. SB 94, which allows parole consideration for criminal sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. I talked to Juan Alanis about that last week. Absolutely terrible bill.
Yeah.
That is still out there, has not been sent to the governor yet. SB 525, the healthcare minimum wage increase to $25 that could have a major impact on health access in California. SB 553, which puts small business owners on the front lines of stopping crime and basically does not allow them to engage with criminals and puts a number of other mandates on them that will cost them money. SB 799, unemployment insurance for striking workers, which is still out there. I see your face. You're really excited about all these bills.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just this stuff. All I got to say is if you're a resident of California, you're a business of California, the next week of your life is a scary one. Going to raise taxes, going to stop store owners from protecting their own stuff, going to release people from prison who've killed up to 2 people. This is the craziest thing. Yeah. Who sits in their office and is like, you know what? That guy who killed 2 people, maybe he's better now. I mean, it's like we need to agree that we should be punishing people, at some point when you kill somebody.
Well, at least agree that, rehabilitation is a laudable goal.
Yeah.
But there are some people that cannot be rehabilitated. And we need to be honest about that.
Yes.
And
I think this podcast should come out Thursday. So that way nobody catches wind of it on Wednesday and then kills my bills that I have remaining.
Well, how about you get them done before Wednesday?
Yeah, I got to tell my staff to get
I'm bringing
on
my last bill up today on the floor.
Okay,
so I'm on the file today. So
nice.
My final bill is back for concurrence and headed to the governor. So
I have 2 in the Senate that I was waiting for.
Hopefully headed to the governor. I'm not going to speak that.
Oh yeah,
I don't want to jinx it.
I'll probably vote no on it.
It's yeah, I don't know. We might have to have some words if that's the case now. So yeah, all those bills are still outstanding, and we went deeper into that. So if you want to hear more about those bills, go and listen to last week's episode 13. But 3 other bills, and honestly, we don't even have time to talk about all the bad business bills. I mean, I literally have an entire list in my folder over here that are going to put more mandates and cause more problems for small businesses.
Yeah.
And it would take another hour, right? So I wanted to mention at least one that's out there, SB 253, which places new requirements that force private businesses, including those that are not headquartered in California, to monitor and report on carbon emissions. It imposes new fees on companies, and it empowers state bureaucrats, namely CARB, the Air Resources Board, to levy financial penalties against businesses. I mean, this is a bad one. This is a bad one, and this is not an anti-environment take. This is going to be really bad for businesses that are trying to survive in California, and that honestly are moving towards much more climate-friendly policies in their own right.
Yeah. Well, the good news about that is, hopefully it goes away, but the the federal law in terms of interstate commerce and us having
Correct.
to monitor out-of-state companies that do business here. I don't see that holding up. It's so crazy.
You're right. That's going to get challenged, for sure, if it passes.
Yeah, I mean, to the average person, I think you say like, oh, who cares? Some company's got to monitor their carbon emissions or something. It's like, it's not a cheap process, but the scariest part is putting in a regulator to really crack down on whatever the whims are of some unelected bureaucrats sitting in cubicles.
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's like, obviously the cost to the business to fulfill this mandate is problematic. Yeah. But again, what we love to do so much is empower unelected people with no accountability to levy financial penalties. By the way, up to $500,000 is in the bill against our businesses with no recourse. I mean, that is the part that businesses are most worried about, because they have there's no accountability there.
Yeah. Just going to be some person sitting in a cubicle, like I said, But when you talk with people, it's interesting. I talk with people, Democrats too. I mean, staffers, lobbyists, whatever. And they're like, yeah, stuff's crazy, and then it just passes out like no problem. It's just so crazy to me. Everybody knows it's kind of crazy. Yeah. But it just goes through the process.
Yep. Yeah, so that one's probably going to come up for a vote this week in the Assembly.
Well, shrooms are about to be legal, so that might change the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, so that's coming. That one is going to the governor too. Yeah. But another bill coming up this week, SB 407. Requires counties, and there's, by the way, I already said this, but there's just a lot of tough bills in these final 2 weeks that are very controversial, and so
easy for me. I just press the red button.
Sure. Oh, of course, yeah. But I think there's passion on both sides, right? On some of this stuff, but this one requires counties to provide training and assess a prospective foster family's ability and willingness to meet the needs of their child. Of a child, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, as well as a willingness to obtain resources offered. So I think they've done a lot of amendments on this bill as well. But, current law is very simple, in my opinion, and I think it probably should remain that way. Current law says a prospective foster parent needs shown ability and a willingness to provide a family setting that promotes normal childhood experiences that serve the needs of the child. It's pretty broad, I think all-encompassing there. But this bill seeks to kind of narrow it a bit as well and add this second feature to the law.
Yeah, it's hard there's so many bills, bad bills. It's hard to speak out against every single one of them. They're so bad and infuriating. But I used to volunteer at the Sacramento Receiving Home actually a few times. And you see kids and teenagers that don't have a family to care for them living there. And now you want to add another layer on top of that to make it even more difficult for people to become foster parents. It's just crazy. These kids need help. And if there's somebody out there willing to foster and provide that safe family environment, then we should let them do their job.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've talked so much with our county officials about the state of the foster care system in Sacramento County. We had a big story a few months back on kids that were living in, pretty tough conditions that I actually went and toured the facility where they were, and we moved them. We called on them to move out of that facility, but the county folks and they, to their credit, we're working very hard to get them out of there, but there's just not enough families. There's not enough placements.
Exactly.
That's the reality. And I'll be honest, many foster families and foster people that are willing to be foster parents do come, in a lot of ways out of, a religious background or maybe a background that they have beliefs certain beliefs, and the idea that we don't want to possibly place, anyone with a family with those beliefs is pretty. You're going to see I think you're going to see an exacerbation of this foster care family shortage crisis if this bill passes. If families are now just a little bit, even if families are a little bit more hesitant to want to take on a foster child, maybe not even because of this bill, but because that they don't want to be put in a position where they have to somehow be dishonest or even pretend they believe something that they don't actually believe. Yeah. It's just really it's really difficult.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that passes this week and report back.
It's going to be a crazy week. By the time this thing airs on Wednesday, a lot will have changed in California. Yeah. That's what's crazy.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's only in 48 hours from now.
Right, exactly. So, all right, final one. Just a quick update because we brought this up in past episodes. There was a major insurance deal to basically kind of help fix this crisis where we have a number of insurance companies leaving the state. Due to that, we have prices going up. We have people getting non-renewed. We have people losing coverage. I mean, this is a real problem in California. The deal to actually address that is dead for the year. So we according to the author of that bill, that will not be happening this year, which I think is unfortunate. That action can't at least be discussed because I think if we keep waiting, that problem's just going to get worse. So
yeah, insurance is a really big issue in my district, representing some very forested areas in El Dorado and Placer County, and the fact that I have people losing insurance all the time, and it's really sad that deal isn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's a problem.
I don't know the exact details of the deal because we're not involved in the discussions.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is it could have been a great deal, or I've heard different things from different people, but again, I haven't been able to see anything, right?
Yeah.
Like read it.
Who's deciding this stuff? It's like our districts.
Yeah, I know.
It's Republican districts that are largely losing the insurance, or we're not even invited to the discussions. It cracks me up.
No, it is. It's
ridiculous.
It's ridiculous,
yeah.
And I think it's ridiculous that this conversation can't move. Because it's a conversation we definitely need to have. Whether the bill itself was good or bad, I mean, we can't sit here and say it because we've never read it. But the reality is that we know the problem needs to be addressed, and the current situation is not addressing that.
Yeah. We're into passing all these controversial issues that have nothing that matter to nobody in Cal. Yeah, I don't want to say nobody, but I mean really are not the pressing issues that need to be solved. I mean, homelessness, insurance, fires, all those things.
Yeah.
And we're really not addressing any of those in a serious way this entire legislative year.
It's true.
And when I say we, I mean,
it's not it's the collective we, remember?
Yes,
like exactly. The governor said, it's not
I would like to address them, and I proposed legislation to address them.
All those bills were killed, though,
pretty
early on.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, good. Well, hey, I appreciate it. I know this was a little bit heavier today, a little bit denser of a discussion that we normally have. And that's a product of kind of this end of session bill load that we have this year. So I appreciate you joining the discussion. To end on a slightly more positive note, football is back.
Thank God.
The NFL is back.
Yeah.
Which I'm extremely happy about.
Yeah.
And we're both Niners fans. How do you feel about those Niners on Sunday?
I mean, they look really good. Pittsburgh is supposed to be good. I have no idea if they are. I really don't know at the beginning of the year.
I think
there was a lot of talk about them being good. I think they probably were overhyped. But
They're
I don't
a great
actually
coach
know
team
because the Niners are good. I mean, there's not a more talented roster than the 49ers. I understand the quarterback situation. We don't really know yet, right? But the receivers, the tight end, the defense. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So,
great team. My son is really excited. He's never really gotten into football, and now he's a little older.
Is he a Niners fan though?
He is.
Wasn't he?
He is now. He's fighting me on baseball, but that's a separate conversation.
But
I
thought about getting rid of him for so trading him in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, but the Niners, I think, because they're good, it helps. Because they're one of the top teams, like it helps.
He probably hasn't really lived through the pain and suffering that we went through.
He doesn't appreciate it either. Yeah, even if but I was excited to see the Niners play really well, but also just glad football's back.
Yeah,
I'm really. It's one of those few things I feel like that, and obviously not everyone watches football. But you know how back in the day, people used to watch all this, everyone watched the same television show or something.
Yeah.
And so you'd always have something around the water cooler to talk about, sort of thing. And that's not really the case anymore with the amount of content that we have now. Like everyone's watching different stuff. And, it's great from a consumer standpoint, but from a kind of collective, standpoint, I feel like the NFL is like one of those things that just a much larger group of people participates
Exactly.
in. Right?
My scheduler has on my calendar every 49ers game.
Okay, that's awesome.
I'm unavailable.
You're unavailable. I love that.
It has to be really good for me to.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so I didn't even ask her to do it. She just put it on. So,
no, that's a good scheduler.
Yeah, she's great. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. She just knows it's that much of a priority for you. I love it. I have not gone that far, but I'll have to...
I do record the games sometimes if I am gone to a community event or something. And if anybody tells me the score during that time, I will never go back. It's because I want to go back and watch a game. I turn off the notifications on my phone.
Nice.
Don't talk to anybody.
That's funny.
Yeah. So.
Well, I'll make sure not to tell you, not to be like, hey,
yeah, exactly.
I'm glad it's been a day. So hopefully you've watched the game.
And I went to the Giants game last night.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it was a good game. They won, right?
Yeah, they won.
Okay. That's a rarity these days for the Giants, seriously. The last couple of weeks. Yeah. But all right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today. Any final thoughts before we leave?
Just hoping to survive, and let's get through this week. And then 3.5 months in the district. I'm super stoked to hang out with constituents and the residents of the 5th Assembly District for the next
I'm so excited about this the next few months. I mean, just being in the district all the time and not having to be in Sacramento all the time.
Exactly.
It's going to be really great. So one announcement with the legislature adjourning at the end of this week for the year, the podcast will be taking a short break, and we'll be back in October to recap the governor's, what he signed, what he vetoed, stuff like that. We're trying to get Megan Daly on for that one. We've had some scheduling conflicts, so we'll see if that happens. But we'll also be recording and releasing a few episodes this fall and winter with a number of special guests before session reconvenes in January 2024. So some stuff to look forward to. You can share ideas for future shows by emailing us, pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Please like and follow the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or whatever you listen to. You can watch and subscribe on YouTube at Point of Order Pod, and follow the podcast on all the socials at Point of Order Pod. You can also follow today's co-hosts on Twitter. I'm at Joshua_Hoover, and this Joe is at Patterdude. And thanks, Joe. Really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me again.
All right. See you later.